Good evening, everybody. I can't see you all, but it would be lovely if I could. And you are very, very welcome to this synod. We're going to begin, before doing anything else, with our prayers and a biblical reflection from Joe Phillips. We're delighted to have Joe with us. Joe is the new Social Responsibility Officer for Churches Together in Cumbria. It's taken over from Sheila Goldie, whom many of you will remember. And Joe is also married to Ben, who is one of the incumbents in this diocese. And Joe, we're delighted to have you with us. Thank you very much indeed. And we look forward to your prayers.
Thank you very much. The first thing I would like to say is thank you very much to you, Bishop James, for inviting me to lead the prayers this evening. It's lovely to be virtually here, so thank you. So I intend to be brief. I know there's always lots to do at these meetings. So on my first slide, well, second, there are just a few bullet points that point to the kinds of work that Churches Together is about. A lot of you will be aware of it, but on the next slide, there's some bullet points. There you go, that just point to the kinds of work that we focus on. Some of them might be a surprise at the breadth and depth of the kinds of activities that we get up to. But the way that Churches Together have honed in on social justice and responsibility as an effective way of bringing together different denominations stands out actually amongst other Churches Together groups in England and is bearing much fruit. It's a witness and a resource not only to and from the churches across our area, but also for other voluntary sector organisations, for charities, for local government groups, emergency services, other faith groups, and so on. And there's certainly, as I'm discovering, no shortage of work to be done. And it's so much better when we do that work together. Indeed, what we make when we work together is so much more than the sum of all our individual parts. So I'm delighted to be getting my teeth into this. I'm going to begin by reading from a scripture which is probably very well known to you, from Isaiah 61, verses 1 to 4, if anyone wants to follow along. So, the Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is on me, because the Lord has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom for the captives, and release from darkness for the prisoners, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favour and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all who mourn and provide for those who grieve in Zion, to bestow on them a crown of beauty instead of ashes, the oil of joy instead of mourning, and a garment of praise instead of a spirit of despair. They will be called oaks of righteousness, a planting of the Lord for the display of his splendour. They will rebuild the ancient ruins and restore the places long devastated. They will renew the ruined cities that have been devastated for generations. Now, each one at this Zoom meeting, in one way or another, is called and appointed by the Spirit of God for the ministry within the body of Christ. We are all oaks of righteousness. Congratulations, everybody. We are a planting of the Lord for the display of his splendour. Now, the use of trees as a metaphor for the people of God goes right back to the very beginning and continues to the very end of Scripture. In its essence, we know that because of that, we long to bring glory to God, that we long to bear much fruit for his glory, that we want to be able to stand firm in the storms, that we want to be able to provide shelter and help for others along the way. But in order to do this, we must all remain close to the streams of God's word and his presence. We must put down strong and intentional roots into the ground where we have been planted, and to reach out our boughs as wide as we can in order to receive what we need from God. Now, we know that this passage was quoted by Jesus at the beginning of his public ministry, and it tells us much, therefore, about his priorities here on earth. It's also the ministry that he expects us to continue after his ascension into heaven as his church. And it's one of the passages that goes to the very heart of what's on God's heart. And I use it to shape our prayers now. So would you join me in prayer? Lord, we bring ourselves before you now, acknowledging that apart from you, we can do nothing. You are the author and perfecter of our faith, and the one from whom every gift and talent, every resource, every good and perfect thing comes. Come, Lord, and fill and inspire each of us according to your good, pleasing, and perfect will, for your plans and your heart for your church across the Diocese of Carlisle. Lord, we see your constant and deep love of the poor, and our hearts long to love what you love, to seek what you seek, and to do as you would do. Where our hearts, Lord, lack love for the poor, would you fill them anew with yours? Help us to find ways, new and old, large and small, to serve the poor and to bring the things of which they stand in need. Help us, Heavenly Father, to find the time, tools, ways, and love to bind up those brokenhearted in our churches and communities. For you alone are the source of healing and wholeness, and we look to you to enable our desires to come alongside the broken and the sad, to express something of your love through ours. There are many held captive in so many ways across our region and across the world. We ask, Lord, for your powerful hand to release those held captive through abuse, through dysfunctional relationships, addictions, poverty and injustice. Lord, we long for an end to modern slavery. Help us not to grow weary in our pursuit of freedom for those who lack it. Lord, your gospel is good news. Would you bring us a fresh vision of your good news and a renewed zeal to share it with those around us? And renew in us, Lord, a fear of you as the path of wisdom requires. Refresh our motivation for ministry, for your desire that all would be saved. We know, Lord, that you long to comfort those who mourn and to bring an end to their grief, replacing it with wholeness and gladness, beauty for ashes. So many are mourning for loss of loved ones, employment, plans and dreams, and our hearts weep with them. Help us to continue to be there for people, to listen and to help them on the long journey through bereavement. Lord, we are weary. These strange months have been a drain on us. Would you strengthen us again for your service and help us to find life anew in you? Help us to remember that there are always so many reasons to thank and praise you. Help us to be a witness for others, Lord, for the display of your glory, not for our sakes, Lord, but for yours and for that of the kingdom. The work that we do is built on the foundations laid by countless others who also followed and served you. Thank you. We want to build according to your plans. Help us each to take up our cross daily, to gather our tools, tuck our cloaks in our belt, our spiritual sword in one hand, and let us do our part to build up the walls again, to defend and protect your people, to provide for them, to disciple and guide them, and to hand on to the next generation a church and a world that is healthier than the one into which we were born. And so we offer you, Lord, these our prayers in humility and faith, and in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ. Amen.
Joe, thank you very, very much indeed. That was lovely. Thank you. Just a couple of very brief notices. The first is to say that this, sadly, is the last synod of the triennium, this little period. So can we offer our huge thanks to all of you for being part of it. We do hope to see a lot of you again in the new synod. And just at the moment, there are quite a number of vacancies. So if that applies to your deanery, please do make sure that the relevant process is followed for people to be nominated and elected. And talking of nominations and elections, this summer there will be general synod elections as well. We have about 6 of us who are members of General Synod. It is quite an interesting time to be a member of General Synod at the moment. And so if you would like to stand, or if you know somebody else who you think would be very appropriate for General Synod, please don't hesitate to encourage them or encourage yourself. So those, I think, are the only notices. We've got some apologies for absence: 5 members of the House of Clergy and 5 members of the House of Laity. And that is the apologies. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Jim Johnson, who will lead us through the AGM of the Diocesan Board of Finance and then an ordinary meeting. Reminder to everybody, just in case you need it, and by this time you will know this well, that our Diocesan Synod is also our Diocesan Board of Finance. So Jim, over to you.
Thank you, Bishop James, and good evening to everybody. Perhaps, but who knows, this might be the last synod that we hold on Zoom. Where the next one will be, with Newton Rig in its current situation, is in the lap of the gods at the moment, but I'm sure the plans will evolve and we'll all be able to meet successfully in October. Now, we've got quite a few things to do, but I don't intend that they should take too long. Some of them are formalities, others you might like to dwell on a little longer. So we will now start the annual general meeting it's actually for 2021, although we're considering the 2020 trustees report and accounts, because the year end is the 31st of December 2020, and we obviously can't have the annual meeting to approve them before the year's ended. So it's held in 2021. We've got the minutes of the unusually deferred and actually provisional meeting, which we held having reconvened in October 2020 to discuss the accounts and approve them for December 2019. They legally had to be done. They were extended timetable by the 30th of September 2020, but we didn't have enough people present, so we reconvened, having not had any expressions of dissension in the original meeting. But to get the votes binding, the meeting had to be reconvened. Those are the minutes of that meeting on the 10th of October 2020, and I think the vote is coming up now for you to be able to approve them, if you so wish. So could you now do that, please? Don't mind. And while we're getting the results of that coming through, I haven't seen anything on the agenda which requires special consideration other than the normal items on the agenda for this meeting. We have 2% against, 2% abstain, and 96% for. Thank you very much. I don't think there's any matters arising, and if that is generally agreed, we can move on. The report and accounts for the year to the 31st of December 2020. Now, statutorily and for charity law, as well as company law, we have to produce an extremely long document. The trustees' report encapsulates what's been going on in the diocese throughout the year under review. And it also projects forward for any special circumstances that might be prevailing at the time of this meeting. And of course, we've still got COVID with us, and it you know, hopefully it will be over in another month. But the effects of it are likely to last much longer, I think. So the year to 2020 is summarised in the very nice little two-sided, multicolored with pictures leaflet, which was sent round to you a few days ago. And if you've had a chance to read that, I hope it actually deals with the essentials from a very unusual year, 2020. In March, we just didn't know what we were facing, and we had to batten down the hatches because we thought that income would really dry up. And in some dioceses throughout the country, and we've been keeping a tab on which dioceses have been suffering most and which have been not suffering too badly, we've come up quite near the top of those who have not suffered too badly. But even so, parish offer, which, as we all know, is the main income that we have, went down by 8% overall. And that level of reduction has continued into 2021, and it's something we had to deal with. We anticipated it being worse, but of course, fees, marriages, funerals, whatever, a lot of those have either had lower attendances or haven't been able to happen at all. And so fees have been down. Fortunately, our investment income didn't suffer as much as we feared it might, and our rental income didn't suffer nearly as much as it might. So there's a couple of pluses in there which have enabled us, by the end of the year, having taken a lot of some temporary, some more permanent economic steps early in the game, and unfortunately some redundancies are included in there, some deferred property maintenance, which you can't defer forever. But that enabled us to cut even, have a little plus at the end of the year, having also had to provide for some costs of reorganisation and indeed for further support for Rydal Hall. Now, you'll remember that Rydal Hall was the subject of discussion at the last synod, and it was agreed that Rydal Hall, as an element of mission, was vital in pursuance of the diocese's strategy. So if it costs, it costs. And the reality is, so do most traditional worship communities, because in many respects, and to some large degree in some cases, the cost of ministry is supported from the centre. There are very few, if any, deaneries that are actually self-sustaining in terms of ministry cost. That is a fact. So Rydal was being questioned, but the counter question was, well, why should Rydal have to actually break even or show a surplus when other elements of missionary outreach don't have that constraint upon them? And that argument was won over, and at the last synod, Rydal was seen as being essential to continue, and it does, but it requires continuing support, because obviously it's been closed for business for a large amount of 2020 and going on into 2021. So that's been the scenario we've dealt with. We're not a basket case. Some don't like that phrase, but we have managed to keep our head above water. And I thank everybody, particularly the church house staff, senior management team, and my fellow trustees, for really focusing on the issues in hand and together with Bishop's Council, being prepared to take the difficult decisions, because our long-term aim is to stay here. If we were to start spending our capital willy-nilly, that would lead us down a very slippery path. And the income that we're able to give to support ministry would simply over a number of years dry up and would be even worse off than we currently might be. So in that form of summary, I would ask, well, actually, we've asked in advance if there were any questions on the accounts. And as far as I'm aware, as of lunchtime today, we hadn't received any, because it can be quite awkward with a gathering of nearly 70 people if somebody springs a question on it to actually have the answer properly prepared, which is satisfactory for everybody. So on the assumption that there are no questions, but if anybody does want to raise one, if they are of general principle, that would be good. If they're of particular detail, perhaps not the time to do it, but by all means send them in and we'll try and answer you particularly individually over email. Are there any questions that anybody feels they need to ask on the report and accounts before I ask you to receive them and approve them? Now, I can't see everybody, but I think Dave Roberts will probably tell me whether there are or there aren't any hands up. I haven't heard that there are any hands up. So can we now...
Jim?
Yes?
I can't see everybody on the screen because of the way that I'm having to work this. So perhaps one of my colleagues, maybe Derek, can keep an eye on those people.
There are no hands, Dave.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ali. Then in that case, we'll move to the second vote of the evening, which is to receive and adopt the report of the directors and trustees together with the annual accounts, and that is for the year to December 2020. It'll be coming up on your screen shortly, I expect. There we go. Okay, and while we're waiting for that to come through, the next item on the agenda is the appointment of auditors for the following year. Dodd & Co are very familiar with our procedures. They're very thorough in the way they do it. Rick Jakes works very hard to make sure they're provided with the answers before they ask the questions. And Dodds do have an advantage in that they are auditors of the cathedral and the various elements of the cathedral, the development trust, the friends, etc., the chapter. So there would seem to be no reason other than the in principle question of whether every now and again you should have a beauty parade, and I would support that. But I'm not sure that we need any more disruption in the diocese just at the present time. They're very unusual circumstances. So I would propose that, and this is your third vote coming up, that Dodd & Co be appointed as auditors for the coming year. Thank you. That will conclude, unless there are, well, there is no other business which is competent for the AGM, to be honest. So that will conclude the AGM, with my grateful thanks to all the staff and trustees that have worked very hard during that last year. And that vote went through 98%. Excellent. We'll now proceed quickly to the normal meeting of the Board of Finance. And as Bishop James has reminded you, you're all members. You're shareholders without actually having any shares, but you are the membership of the Diocesan Board of Finance. And the trustees are the Finance Committee. We're effectively your directors in law, but everybody in the Synod has a say in how the finances of the Synod are managed, and that's why you approve our budgets, etc., and have regular reports on how we're getting on. So on the agenda, Chair's remarks. Very briefly, this year, unfortunately, sees a continuation of the circumstances of 2020. The last accounts we saw as a Board of Finance committee were to the end of April. And at that point, we were broadly in line with budget. Now, budget is unusually allowing a small deficit, but there was a challenge in there that certain cost elements, which we couldn't yet predict with any degree of certainty, would be very seriously looked at as the year went on. And at the end of April, remembering that we were all hoping to come out of lockdown in the middle of June, as in now, we thought that the year would turn out roughly break even, which in the circumstances, I think it is very creditable, and it's a tribute to everybody in all the parishes who are continuing to work hard to pay through parish share. And in due course, hopefully, levels of parish share will return to the levels they were before we had COVID. Now, that's not a guarantee, it's a hope and a trust, but it is actually an assumption that we're budgeting on for 2022 and onwards. And if that doesn't happen, then there'll be some serious issues to look at, which of course we'll have to do. But this year is going pretty much according to budget. You approved the budget. It was a budget with a deficit of 55,000 in. It will be surprising if it's much worse than that by the year end, even though obviously we're extending a little bit the time when we're coming out of lockdown. But we're assuming that weddings and ceremonies will catch up. We're assuming that churches will return to normal operations. And those are lots of hopes. But we don't want to be too pessimistic. We want to be positive about things. And that's the way we're going at the moment. On the rental side of it, again, our rental properties, the rents are coming through. CCLA, our investment managers, are doing remarkably well, much better than other fund managers which I come across. There are only investment managers, and you might say we should have more than one, but frankly, they are outpacing a lot of their rivals, and it's working. So let's leave it alone, is my view at the moment. Our investment committee regularly meets with CCLA, and I think would support that view. It's minuted anyway. And you will see in our minutes that we do have active investment assessment and monitoring, as we do with properties through both subcommittees. And if you read the minutes of our business, you'll see they're very comprehensive, and they're deliberately so that you all get full information as soon as it's approved. So moving on to the first matter, which is to approve and sign the minutes of the meeting held on the 6th of March 2021. That was the meeting we held in Diocesan Synod. So that's a minute of the meeting we all had together. So could I ask you to proceed now to vote 3, which is to approve the minutes of the meeting, I think it's vote 4, held on the 6th of March 2021. Those of you who were here. The next question to you on the minutes is to receive the minutes of the meetings which the committee, that is the directors and trustees, hold. And we've had two meetings at which minutes have been approved since we last met, on Wednesday the 20th of January and on Wednesday the 17th of March. If you've wished to, you've had an opportunity to read them. Do you wish the Synod to receive them? That is our next vote. Thank you. Now, while that vote's coming through, I have to say we've either had, well, we've between 96 and 98% for all our votes so far in favour. So I think that's worthy of comment, but we needn't dwell on it. Item 4, special resolution. You might wonder why we're doing this. Derek Hurton is now going to explain what led us to produce this particular paper for you.
Thanks, Jim. I was thinking when I was preparing for this item that 3 years is a long time, particularly the last 3 years. But those of you who've got good memories will probably recall that in 2018, we made some changes to the Articles of Association for the Board of Finance, and they included setting limits to the terms of office of elected trustees. And that was a response to a situation where previously there had been no limits to the terms of office. We're now proposing that we extend the limits that we brought in, and the proposal before you, as part of a number of changes to the Articles of Association, is to extend the maximum terms of office from 2 terms of 3 years to 3 terms of 3 years, with elections at the end of each term. And in essence, we're recommending this because the benefits of a degree of continuity and experience on the trustee body are considerable, and we feel that 2 terms of 3 years each, actually, given the complexity of the business of the Board of Finance and the relatively limited number of trustee meetings that happen, so 1 every 2 months, means that 2 terms of 3 years each don't really give us the optimum length of time for trustees to become familiar with the business and build up relationships with each other, and with the ex officio trustees and with the staff, including people like myself. I think actually, in terms of my working relationship with Jim, it's become stronger and stronger as time has gone on. But inevitably, in the first couple of years of Jim being a chair, we were finding out a bit about each other and how we operate, etc. And I think the fruits of that are being seen now. But if we persisted with the 2 times 3 year terms, Jim would be toddling off into retirement just at the time when maybe we were getting the most fruitful part of our relationship. You might ask whether 3 terms of 3 years, so possibility of 9 years, is too long. I think I would say that the proposals wouldn't result in trustees going beyond the sell-by date, partly because our experience says there's quite a bit of turnover in the trustee body, because for one reason or another, people don't serve that length of time. And in any case, if you felt that there was a degree of staleness among the trustee body, every 3 years, you as the members of the company would have the right to vote a different set of trustees. So it seems to me that a fairly limited extension of trustee terms from a maximum of 6 to a maximum of 9 years makes sense. We tested this against other dioceses. So I asked other dioceses how they approach this, and of the 16 dioceses that responded, not a single diocese had limits that were as short as us on the elected trustees' terms of office. So I think the general consensus seems to be that a bit longer is better. So essentially, that's the main change that we're proposing in the Articles of Association. A second change, which is significant but not as significant, relates to the qualification of co-opted trustees. So there are currently the scope currently for up to 4 co-options to the trustee body, on the basis of people who have the relevant skills and experience to help the trustee body do its job effectively. Previously, co-opted trustees had to be members of the Church of England or members of a church in communion with the Church of England. And we feel that we could widen that a little to increase the potential pool of co-opted trustees. So the draft proposed Articles of Association now include the option for co-opted trustees not only to be members of the Church of England or a church in communion with the Church of England, but also one of the covenanted partnership churches in Cumbria, or a member of a church that's part of Churches Together in Britain and Ireland. So a fairly limited extension, but something which we felt would be worth doing. And we also feel that's worth doing partly because our experience in the last few years is that we do have one of our co-opted trustees who effectively had to join the Church of England in order to become a co-opted trustee, but brings a lot to the board. So we think that would be a useful extension. And then finally, just on the advice of the corporate lawyers, there's a number of changes of wording to bring the wording that we've got in our articles in line with current legislation. they're changes that don't materially affect the operation or the responsibilities of the board. If you like, they're tidying things up to match the current requirements. So I hope that gives you enough of an idea as to why these changes are being proposed. I hope you'll find them uncontentious, and I hope that you'll be able to approve them. I'm happy to take questions if anybody has any questions, if people want to raise their virtual hand. No questions. And just to say that because this is part of the DBF's business, not Synod business, this doesn't require someone to stand up and propose the motion and second it. It's just a resolution before the members of the company. So I think, Dave, unless there's any comments or questions, we can move straight to a vote on that. So there's the vote. If you could tick the box, and we'll see what you think.
Thanks very much, Derek. Yeah, it's quite time-consuming being a trustee of the Board of Finance, but it's very rewarding, not financially, obviously, but you do get an insight into the complexities, not just the spiritual, but the temporal aspects of the things that bear in on the outcomes that the diocese wishes and actually achieves. And obviously drilling down into the parishes through the archdeacons and the discussions that are going on at the moment, I know, between the archdeacons and the rural deans and the mission communities and the individual parish groups about reconciling where they want to go, how they want to get there, and what's going to come as a result, and where does the burden of responsibility equitably share. So they are challenging discussions. They're being held in good faith for the best of reasons, because our determination as a Board of Finance is to, as much as we possibly can, underwrite the ability of the diocese to achieve its single most strategic aim, which is the promotion of mission in an ecumenical diocese to the maximum of our capacity to resource. So the bishop and his team deploy the resources they have. We have to try and find the money for as much resource as they need. And it's an interesting balance, a very interesting balance, a good business scenario, in fact, for those with that experience. Anyway, that vote passed very well. Thank you very much. Now that, to me, concludes the, there's nothing come through on the chat line which would indicate somebody's desperate to ask a question, and that would be the preferred method. So I think I can safely draw that meeting to a close and hand over to the bishop for the rest of the agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much indeed, and thank you for everything that you do as chair of the Finance Committee, and also to all the trustees. We are enormously grateful. The next item on the agenda is minutes of our Diocesan Synod meeting, which was held by Zoom on the 6th of March and chaired by Chris Angus. And my question is whether you are willing to approve those minutes as an accurate record of what took place, those who were there. So if you would like to tick the relevant box on your screen. Thank you very much. We'll get the result of that in just a moment. For 94% and abstaining 6. So thank you very much for that affirmation. And we move on to matters arising from those minutes. We have two actually on our agenda, maybe others that people wish to raise, but we'll take the two matters arising that are on the agenda first. One is progress on Rydal Hall. Jim referred to Rydal earlier on in his remarks, and a paper has been produced by Richard Pratt, Archdeacon Richard Pratt. Richard, I don't know if you want to say anything about this paper. Can't see you, but
I'm here.
We've got to go. Hello. Do you want to say anything?
Thank you, Bishop James. I mean, I think what I can add is that, in fact, the concern about recruitment, which you'll know from Synod members will know from the news, is a really big issue for many businesses in the Lakes. Actually, at the moment, Rydal's doing fine on recruitment. We've been able to attract some very good people and have enough, our general managers feel that there's enough staff recruited to be able to run the hall at the capacity to which we're able to run it at the moment, and also when restrictions are lifted. So, I mean, we were there today for a board meeting. It's really, really busy. There's loads of stuff going on and loads of people about. So I think on the whole, lots of good news, thanks to an enormous amount of hard work by particularly Alison, the Deputy General Manager. Perhaps I could also mention David, our chaplain, who's been wonderful as well.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
And Rick and Ali and all the members of the committee.
It's beginning to sound like a BAFTA award.
Yes, well, there you go.
And your mum, I'm sure. Yeah, no, thank you very much indeed. That's lovely. And we are very grateful to all of them. We really are. If anybody's got anything they would like to ask about that, then please raise it. But otherwise, we will move on to the next item. I'm assuming nobody's raising their hand. We will be coming back to Rydal quite a lot in meetings to come. Yeah, well, the next matter arising is the Clergy Covenant on Wellbeing. Haven't quite got to the Bishop's Council report yet, Dave. So there was a paper on this from Cameron Buckland. Cameron, I guess you're here somewhere. Yes, there you are.
Yes, Bishop James.
Thank you.
I don't propose to talk through the paper that you've had, just simply to say that there's some background to the Clergy Covenant, which was agreed by the General Synod. It's really part A of the report that's important, because that's what we're proposing to the Synod this evening. It's been through the Bishop's leadership team. The Bishop's Council has also looked at this paper. And so what we're proposing in section A is the preparation for the engagement with the Clergy Covenant. Just point out the key things on that. First of all, the importance to get information, to have an informed discussion about the Clergy Covenant. And that's not just simply asking serving clergy, but also spouses and other people in the diocese as well. We recognise the need that it's difficult for clergy very often to talk about these things in PCCs and deaneries, so there need to be external independent facilitators, and we're getting on with recruiting those. We're looking at pilot projects, one in a deanery and one in a group of parishes, and I'm pleased that both Appleby Deanery and Kirby Longsdale have agreed to be part of pilot in the autumn for all of this. So thank you to Stuart and Richard especially for being so happy to help. But of course, if we look at clergy wellbeing, there's other groups of people who also need their wellbeing considered and cared for. One, of course, is clergy spouses, and we're doing some work on that. And also there's all the local lay leadership, which is not covered by the Clergy Covenant process as handed down by the General Synod, but is very much in our minds as well. And Nikki Smith, as the Diocesan Director of Ministry Development, met with myself and Chris Angus as the Chair of House of Laity to look at this in some detail last week. And Chris is pulling together a meeting of Deanery lay chairs to begin that process and use some of the material which is available, and very good material that's available in the Church of England. So I'll ask you in a few moments whether you're happy to accept all that. The rest of the paper is really about what will happen over the next year, the engagement process, and then finally on the other side of the paper, what the proposed outcomes are. I think it speaks for itself. Anybody want to ask any questions about clergy covenant process?
Any questions to Cameron?
In which case, Bishop James, can I ask that we just accept this paper, and then Nikki and her team and Chris and his work, and I can get on with the facilitators and just implement what's been proposed.
We're not actually taking a vote on it as such, but unless anybody has any violent objection, we'll assume that you're happy with us continuing down this track and on this way forward. Lots of people are waving or putting up their thumbs. Thank you very much. And so I think the answer to that is, Cameron, carry on. And thank you very much indeed. This is something we're taking very seriously, not least post-pandemic.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other matters arising that anybody wants to raise just before we come on to the Bishop's Council report? I'm sure somebody will tell me if I'm taking that as a no. So we do now move on to the Bishop's Council report, for which thank you very much. This is a report on the meeting held on the 23rd of February. And I move that the report of the Bishop's Council meeting held on that date, 23rd of February 2021, be received. This is paper D in your papers and gives quite a detailed account of what took place. This one we will have a look. Here we are. It's on your screen. If you'd like to place your vote. Well, there we are, 96% for and 4% abstaining. So thank you very much indeed for that. Well, so far there's been a lot of reporting. We're now going to have a very interesting session on the Reaching Deeper project and the Northern Mission Centre, and there will be an opportunity during this to go into small groups and have a little bit of a discussion, as there will in the item that follows it. So I'm going to pass over to Kerry and Richard, who are going to introduce us to this aspect of our God for All vision and strategy, the Reaching Deeper project. Over to you both. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bishop James, and good evening, everybody. As Bishop James introduced, my name is Kerry and I lead the programme management for Reaching Deeper. I'm just going to give you a brief overview and update of what Reaching Deeper is as a programme of work and the projects that sit within it, before handing on to Richard, who will talk you through more about the mission, the Northern Mission Centre's work, and go through some group discussions and sessions with you. If I could just have the next slide, Dave, thank you. So Reaching Deeper, I believe you've had a summary information paper about this as well. So this presentation is in conjunction with that paper. But Reaching Deeper is a 5-year programme of work funded through the Church of England's Strategic Development Fund, which is looked after by the Strategic Investment Board. And the Diocese of Carlisle has been given £1.6 million over the 5 years, the duration of the Reaching Deeper project for this work. And the programme's designed to form part of the wider God for All vision by helping with the development of a mixed ecology of church across our mission communities. And we actually started this work in January 2020, 3 months before the pandemic hit. So obviously some activities and work has been affected or delayed due to the impact of the pandemic. And what that means is actually the programme, rather than being 5 years, it spans over 6 years because of the delay in starting some of that work. If we could just have the next slide, Dave. Thank you. So within Reaching Deeper itself, there are 6 projects that sit within it. 5 are led by pioneer enablers in various locations across the county, and 1 project is delivered through the Northern Mission Centre. And the pioneer enablers have a 2-stage approach in their work and in their projects over the 5, 6 or 6 years. And so the first stage is around building a local worshipping community and encouraging other missional activities in their local area and their local mission community. And then the second stage is around taking that learning from the first and supporting other mission communities and other churches or groups around the county to help them build up their missional focus too. And the Northern Mission Centre provides support and training in this, including working with the pioneer enablers. So if we look to the projects themselves, if we could just have the next slide, Dave. Thank you. We had 2 projects that started in 2020. We've got, it's a fairly dense slide, so I'm not going to go through all of the information there, but we had 2 projects that started in 2020. So the first was in Carlisle, and the second was county-wide around the outdoors and education. And then we have 2 more projects around the West Coast and in Barrow, which have had pioneer enablers recruited to them that will start this September. And we then have a final project in Penrith that has a pioneer enabler post actually in recruitment at the moment. So if you are aware of anybody who might be interested in that post, I would encourage you to share it with them. And then finally, the 6th project is the Northern Mission Centre, and that started in July last year. And all of these projects are supported by myself, and we have Andrew Scott, who is a programme support officer who formed the programme management office, and also a pioneer enabler team leader who's Emma Richardson. Now I've talked through the mechanics and the setup of Reaching Deeper, but as I just before I pass on to Richard, I really wanted to emphasise that the whole programme of work, and this is the most important part, is designed to help support and encourage in the local context, reaching out to people who don't yet know Jesus, so they can have an opportunity to live out, that life-changing relationship with him. That's really throughout the DNA of Reaching Deeper as a programme of work. So I'm going to pass over to Richard now, who will talk a bit about how Reaching Deeper supports doing just that across the county and the region.
Thanks, Kerry. That's great to hear, always super concise. It's brilliant to work with Kerry. I kind of come up with the crazy ideas and Kerry puts them into a decent order and a way of working that kind of works for everybody. And I'm delighted to introduce the Northern Mission Centre to Synod at this stage. Dave, can we have the next slide? One of the things I really want to stress is that we're building on what God's already been doing across Cumbria for the last 5 years. What we've really seen through the reports of Fresh Expressions and pioneering has been significant growth over the last 5 years in Fresh Expressions. You will remember some of the stats were around a quarter to a third of people involved in church in Cumbria are now involved in a Fresh Expression. We'd got to 112 Fresh Expressions before COVID hit, and I've circulated the latest Fresh Expressions report. We've really been innovating and building relationships, getting things going on the ground, and the Strategic Development Fund recognised that in supporting this large project to build on what had kind of gone before. So Dave, can I have the next slide? One of the things that's been really important for the Reaching Deeper project is to think about the mixed ecology of church. So as we've seen fresh expressions grow across Cumbria, we've been thinking about pioneering as a spectrum of work, thinking about both time-honoured church, which is a kind of new phrase that Bishop Emma introduced, which is great to replace kind of institutional church or some of those more archaic words. But I really like the time-honoured phrase. But the Reaching Deeper project is around helping time-honoured and fresh expressions pioneer into the community to reach more people with the good news of Jesus, as Kerry mentioned. And one of the ways that we start to think about that is on this idea of a pioneer spectrum. So some churches will be replicating new work. One of the things that we've seen from COVID is that the whole of time-honoured church has been quite pioneering during the COVID period. Many churches have replicated their services into the online space. And it's great to see, our established clergy pioneering in that way. Some people have been adapting. So Messy Church is a great idea of kind of how to do church with children and families, to do that differently. And again, through the last COVID period, we've seen adaptations of Messy Church happening. There's a great example in Keswick with Lawrence, who's been developing kind of gift bags for families and taking Messy Church into the physical space of people's homes as they've engaged with these kind of creative packs. Innovators is a kind of another key space for us. We have a great history of kind of innovative mission in Cumbria, going back hundreds of years, actually, when you start to kind of look at what some of our creative clergy were doing back in the day. And I was chatting to Bishop James about this earlier, but we're seeing good innovation happen across Cumbria. And one of the ways to illustrate that is Paul, who is our outdoors and education person, has been working with Yvette in Maryport School to create a wellbeing space. And the feedback from the students and the teachers in this kind of outdoor wellbeing space is there's something really special going on. Some of them have used spiritual language of kind of saying they can sense something different when they're in this space. It's a place of healing. It's a place of meditation. It's a place of stillness, and a great kind of piece of innovation. And we've also got pioneer activists happening across Cumbria. The Restore, what was the op shops, is a great example of that. And Chris, who's the pioneer enabler for Restore, again, has been doing some really creative work. I just heard that their Men in Sheds project is liked so much by the local police that the police want to help staff it to make sure it happens and make sure that they always have enough volunteers so the project can happen. And so thinking about this kind of pioneer spectrum is a really key way forward for us for reaching deeper. Dave, can you slide on? One of the things that slide didn't really mention was the role of our time-honoured clergy and the people who are kind of the gatekeepers and make the space for pioneering to happen on the ground in our mission community. And so I tend to call them pioneer accommodators, people who are willing to accommodate pioneering in their local setting and to make the space for it to happen. And that's been a key bit of what we've been doing and what we will be doing, working with local mission communities to ask the questions really across that rainbow, across that spectrum of activity, across this idea of mixed ecology. What does a really good mixed ecology of church look like in your local area? How can you effectively reach your people? And sometimes that might be about using the strengths of the time-honoured church. So take, for example, education. Lots of schools like to visit school buildings. They like to hear about the history of the building. They like to hear about how it connects with the local community. Other schools need to have some pastoral supports. And so Network Youth Church, for example, will often go in and do detached youth work in a local school, offer that kind of informal pastoral role. And that's a great example of fresh expressions and time-honoured churches working together to see the mixed ecology of church emerge in our communities as we go forward. So I'm going to get you to do a bit of work. Dave, if we can flash on to the next page. So I've given you a very brief introduction to this pioneer spectrum, and we're going to go to a poll in a minute, but just to be aware that in the poll the words may disappear slightly because you don't get to have as many characters as you like in a poll. And we're going to ask you, where do you feel most at home? Are you a pioneer accommodator? Are you happy about making space for other people to pioneer? Are you a replicator? You kind of like the established models of church, and you're willing just to kind of take that established model and put it into a new place? Are you a pioneer adapter, where you like playing creatively with the edges of church to create a new worshipping community? Maybe you're an innovator, where you're really listening and allowing the gospel to respond and shape a new worshipping community. An example of that you might be familiar with would be something like Mountain Pilgrims. Or maybe you're a pioneer activist. Actually, in your secular work, in your day-to-day life, you're deliberately developing businesses and opportunities, and you're interested in transforming that secular space in the name of Christ. But I would be wondering as well, actually, if there wasn't a few pioneer avoiders who'd rather just hide in the broom cupboard. So the poll's going to open. And I'll be really interested to kind of see in a moment what the results of that are. But I'm going to pose 2 questions to you to discuss in small groups. Dave, can you flash up that next slide whilst we're waiting for the poll to respond? Okay, so we've got 38% accommodators. If half the room is the house of clergy, then perhaps that means that not everybody is open to being an accommodator, but that's okay, because I'm sure that knowing that our clergy around Cumbria, we've got quite a few activists, innovators and adapters as well, because there's some really great people involved. Interesting, the kind of adapter space being the second one, and we'll save that and I'll do some work with that later. Thanks very much, Dave. Can we have the next slide? So we're going to put you into small groups, and then we'll take some feedback. 2 questions really. How might Synod make space for pioneering? The vision refresh has kind of identified that mixed ecology of church is part of where we're heading. It's part of the national church's agenda, but obviously being Cumbria, we've been kind of on this for a while now. It's good to see the national church catching up. But how might we make more space for pioneering? And you could think structurally about that. Do you want to allocate particular resources to pioneering? Do you want to think creatively across the spectrum? What might Synod do to make more space for pioneering? Also, a way into the question might be to think about who is already working on the pioneer spectrum in your local area, and what opportunities do you see? Because what we're beginning to see with the Northern Mission Centre is, if you can spot a few opportunities, we may be able to help you develop those opportunities through the Northern Mission Centre and the Pioneer Enablers. So into groups, 10 minutes maximum, and Dave will give you a warning when you have a minute left. I hope you did have chance to discuss the question. We'll take some general questions and stuff on the question and some feedback in a moment. In the meantime, I'd really encourage you just to, in the chat, put any practical ideas that kind of came up from your group discussion, any thoughts that may help us as we plan for the future. But I just wanted to kind of outline a little bit more about the Northern Mission Centre before we take that chat. The eagle-eyed among you may have spotted that our logo is made up of 3 parts. It's a boat, a compass, and a map. We're really interested in what it means to go to the other side of the lake. Jesus was in the boat with the disciples going to the other side of the lake to reach unreached people's groups. So how do we help the church reach deeper into its community? There's a compass, and Jesus is our true north. And then there's a map. And what we really know is that the culture and context of mission has really changed over the last 50 or 60 years. Perhaps the church hasn't changed as fast, and we need to really understand the context that we're in. And so what we're doing to really build this mixed ecology of church is to think about how you take the social innovation that's happened over the last few years to scale across Cumbria. And there's 4 really important parts about that. Actually, naming and describing what the mixed ecology looks like is going to be really important. So that example that I gave from education, a good way of describing what that means. We need to network people together. We have seen some real strengths of people coming together and sharing ideas and then going off and doing different things. There's an awful lot of walking groups that don't call themselves mountain pilgrims, and that's fine by me, because I'm not about building an empire, we're about building the kingdom. We want to nourish through training and development, and we want to illuminate. We really want to tell the good news stories of what's going on, whether that's the Wild Goose Choir up in just outside Carlisle, whether that's mountain pilgrims, whether that's people who've created fresh expressions off the back of doing lots of christenings. There's so much going on in the county. We really want to illuminate that so that we can see the work of the kingdom across the place. We're obviously working in different areas, and they're kind of outlined at the bottom. We're really keen to use the Pioneer Enablers to promote good practice. We want to have some parties and some festivals. We have good resources, and we have a whole suite of different bits of training. The main one of which at the moment is the Pioneer Certificate, which we've just come to the first year end of, and we've had 16 people complete the Pioneer Certificate from across the north of England, and we're now actively recruiting for 2021. So if you've got a missional idea, or if you've got somebody in your church that perhaps has the gift of not fitting in to churches we know it, then send them my way, and we'll stick them on the certificate and see how we get on. But let's go to kind of questions and feedback and things in the chat. I think, Bishop James, are you going to chair this section?
I can do. I can't actually see all the things. So I think probably it would be easier, Richard, if you do, and Dave tells you, or Kerry tells you if there are any questions. You're happy to do that?
Yeah, that's fine. I can see the chat and I can respond to ones in there. So if people put questions into the chat, I'll try and respond, and Kerry should be able to as well. We are in the process of directly co-opting pioneers onto Diocesan Synod. James brought that to Synod last time, I think, and we've got 5 joining for the October meeting. The digital resource, we're already underway with a Pioneer library, and once the new God for All website goes live in a couple of months, then you'll be able to access a whole suite of different digital resources. We're really active in the sports field. There's a new National Anglican Sports Ministry department, and Maranatha Yoga has been asked to speak to that, and Pauline has been is moving into that. Charles asks to look at how Synod, Diocese and Deanery and how they work at the moment. We're very formal and, dare I say it, boring. Should we be different? Yes, would be the answer to that. I think one of the things that we're seeing across Cumbria is, as we seek to grow younger, we're really wanting to recruit the breadth of people in Fresh Expressions into Synod. And the more creative that we can be with that process. And I know before COVID, having spoken to Jane on Bishop's Council, she was already working on a kind of round tables type of approach and being able to promote good discussion and things. What happens when the funding ends? We have tried to deliberately build sustainability into the roles. So all of the roles have at least a 3-point pathway towards sustainability that we're looking at. One problem is that in Time Honored Church, we are all too accustomed to having church done to us. Yeah, I think that's one of the really interesting pieces that we're picking up from the story process, is actually on the ground, when we tell the stories of Fresh Expressions and pioneering to people, is actually people don't fear change, they fear loss. And so people are quite up for doing new things, so long as there's a sense that we're being looked after. And I think the part of the work that we're doing with the Pioneer Accommodators is to address that piece of how do we work with time-honoured and Fresh Expressions to create that mixed ecology. I'm trying to keep up.
If I could just chip in about the sustainability point, Richard.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Just to say, obviously our sustainability plans were written in 2019, pre-pandemic, and we've agreed with the funders that at the start of 2022 we'll be doing a review of our sustainability plans, just to check that they are still relevant, or to see what we can do in terms of being proactive about the changes and the impact that the pandemic might have. So that's part of the thinking as well in terms of future funding. So, for example, if one of the plans around sustainability was looking at local grants to apply for, to check that post-pandemic those local grants might actually still be there, and if not, what can we do instead? So it's that kind of level of thinking.
To respond to Fran's question about the opportunity to teach and train time-honoured clergy, I'm involved in the Mission Community Leadership Development Programme this year. I'm hoping that I'll be invited back next year, and that's where we're going to do some of the Pioneer Accommodator training, looking at a whole range of how do you help innovation happen and what does that mean. We're going to run some fuller days for clergy and leaders to get involved with that if people want to. And the other kind of part of that I would say that is available is the National Church has been piloting a mixed ecology minister training program through Ed Olsworth-Peters, who's the national lead on pioneering, and where we have already put a pioneer minister in Whitehaven, she's been finding that a really helpful resource to accompany her in post. It looks at where clergy are in posts where they're trying to foster innovation and keep time-honoured church growing and working. That's a great resource that's the National Church is going to kind of roll out a bit more. How do we balance FX development? Yeah, I think the ageing churches piece is really important, and I'm really delighted that in the Vision Fresh we've got growing younger as this overarching, or I'm not sure how Bishop Emma used to describe it, but if you see my hand doing the circle, you know what I mean, where it is on her diagram. But I think that growing younger piece is really important, and it's been brilliant to welcome Nikki and Andy into the diocese with a whole range of experience there. So Andy is the new growing younger officer, and I know that it's something Nikki's actively working on. Nikki, did you want to say anything on that?
No, not particularly. Just hello, everybody. Really lovely to meet you. I'm Nikki, the new Director of Ministry Development. Looking forward to meeting you in person in the future. Thanks, Richard.
That's all right. I think the other thing I'd say about the FX is actually we're seeing some really creative work with older people. I absolutely love talking to old ladies. And there was a brilliant older lady up in a place where she'd started a fresh expression in an old people's home, and that was kind of 10 years ago, and she's now moved into the home herself in a kind of extended housing space where she's got her own little flat. And the people that she's been ministering to for the last decade or so throughout lockdown have been coming along, knocking on her door, bringing her prayers, their prayers and their wishes and their concerns for their family across the country. And it's been a beautiful, beautiful expression of church in this kind of extended old people's home. A one-day workshop on Synod where we can imaginary case study. Yeah, we could definitely do something like that. I'm also happy, Val, to kind of come and work with mission communities as people want. I'm in the process of doing a listening exercise to mission community leaders. So I'll take a copy of all of this chat into my consideration as we build the process. We're out of time. And my alarm's gone off.
Well, you saved me sort of breaking in on the conversation, but thank you very, very much to Kerry and to Richard. Really helpful presentation and really exciting too, what's going on. Just hugely grateful to both of you. And of course, as you'll have gathered from what Richard was saying, the Northern Mission Centre is serving the whole of the north of England, the whole of the Northern Province. So here in Cumbria, we are trying to resource the wider church and succeeding, and it's a very exciting prospect indeed. And so do pray for that work. The whole business of how we integrate time-honoured churches, as Richard has said, and fresh expressions is an ongoing challenge to all of us, and an exciting challenge actually. But certainly when mission communities were first established, it was part of the understanding that there would be a mixed ecology and that there would be some fresh expressions in each of them, and alongside the time-honoured churches, and helping everybody to understand that this is all church is part of the task. And we're very grateful for what Richard and Kerry and all our pioneers of every shade, hue and description, as we saw in the list that we had there, are doing a fantastic job, and please continue to pray for them and work with them. Well, and I should have, and thank you to Richard for introducing Nikki and Andy. We're delighted to have them both here, and you will be hearing much more from both of them in due course. On then now to our next item, number 9 on the agenda, which is headed Vacancy in the See of Penrith. And I will introduce this, and there will then be an opportunity again in small groups to discuss a couple of questions, and then we'll take it on from there. So if I introduce this item, I don't think I need to tell anybody here that Bishop Emma has now left this diocese, and that's because she's been appointed as bishop to the archbishops at Lambeth Palace. This used to be called the Bishop at Lambeth. It's got a slightly new title because part of the aim of it is to bring the north and the south closer together, especially in terms of Lambeth Palace and Bishopthorpe. And as a consequence of her leaving after a relatively short space of time as Bishop of Penrith, and we do wish her very well in this new role, and we'll miss her hugely. I'm conscious that there is a lot of speculation around the diocese about the Bishop of Penrith role. There was a question in the chat there, is there a paper about this? The answer is no, so don't hunt through all your papers to try and find one. What I'm saying at the moment is basically it. You may recall that the role was discussed as part of the financial planning task group's work when the pandemic hit. Set up a task group to think about some of the implications, and it might be useful to remind you of exactly what you agreed as Synod when the report of the task group was brought to Synod, and that was that as and when one of four people, either the suffragan bishop or one of the archdeacons, when one of those roles became vacant, we would review the makeup of and mix of bishops' leadership team with a view eventually to moving from three archdeacons and a suffragan bishop to three, whatever that might involve. Nothing was fixed at that time about who it would be. We didn't say it would particularly necessarily be the first person to go. But we did say that because of cuts that were having to be made elsewhere in the diocese, we would take a look at Bishop's leadership team as well. And I now have to consider as the diocesan bishop whether or not to ask the Diocese Commission for permission to fill the vacancy. We can't just do it automatically. We have to go to this group called the Diocese Commission. And part of the process is seeking the views of both Bishops' Council and Diocesan Synod. And so this is part of that overall process. We would have done it anyway, but we also have to do it. One or two points about the role of the Bishop of Penrith, with which I'm quite familiar, having done the job for 7.5 years. When Bishop Emma was appointed in succession to Bishop Robert, we set out four main responsibilities. The first was that the Bishop of Penrith, her main role would be as leader and enabler of mission and outreach throughout the diocese, mission enabler. And the idea was that she would encourage and enable everyone to develop and grow with an emphasis on discipleship, outreach, and evangelism. And in that role, Bishop Emma has chaired the God for All Strategy Implementation Group and the God for All Operations Group, and has been line manager for the God for All team. Second one was that the Bishop of Penrith would share in episcopal duties such as appointments, confirmations, licensings, and engagement with the county, with me as Bishop of Carlisle. Third, that the Bishop of Penrith would have a particular responsibility for care of the clergy with colleagues on the Bishop's leadership team. And fourth, that she would attend and often chair committees and groups, and some of the ones that Emma has been involved with have included the Strategy Steering Group, the Safeguarding Panel, the Rydal Hall Board, and the Board of Education. Now, both the suffragan and diocesan bishops are usually expected to take on national responsibilities. It's part of the job for which they're appointed. And that applies particularly to diocesan bishops. Some of you will be familiar with some of the roles that I have nationally. And so because diocesan bishops tend to get caught up in things like House of Lords and all the rest of it, the suffragan, and this is true in most dioceses, some of which have several suffragan bishops, is normally expected to spend the majority of their time within the diocese and be, as it were, the bishop here, while the diocesan bishop is the bishop who's sometimes here and sometimes not. In addition to the areas of work covered by their role descriptions, other members of the bishop's staff team, and in particular the archdeacons, have responsibilities for particular themes or areas of work. And all of those themes and areas, including in the case of the archdeacons being strategy development officers, working closely with mission communities, if those have to be covered somewhere within the bishop's staff team, or else they're not addressed at that level at all. I mentioned earlier that the Bishop of Penrith role currently acts as a line manager to various roles. That line management is necessary for somebody to do it. Somebody has to do it, and that includes the Director of Ministry Development, the Director of the Northern Mission Centre, that's Richard, who we were just hearing from, SDF funded, the Programme Manager, Kerry, who we were just hearing from, also SDF funded, the Growing Younger Enabler, and the Diocesan Safeguarding Advisor, now to become Diocesan Safeguarding Officer. We're going to think tonight particularly about the Bishop of Penrith's role, but it is quite difficult to separate that role out from the other roles in the bishop's staff, because part of the whole aim of the BLT, Bishop's Leadership Team, is that it should work very collaboratively together, hopefully as a model for what we are looking for in the rest of the diocese and ecumenically. And any decision that we make, whatever the decision, for instance, not to replace the Bishop of Penrith role, will have implications for all the other roles. And over the coming weeks and months, we will be looking at the future shape of the bishop staff team as a whole, not only the role of the Bishop of Penrith, but more widely all of the roles within BLT, and there are 10 of us who are part of that, all of which are needed to lead and to develop our goals under God for all. It might just be worth pointing out, and this is actually quite an important point, that when the task group was talking about senior roles within the diocese, one of the reasons why it was talking about those roles was financial. The task group was actually set up to look particularly at the finances of the diocese and how money, given all the implications of the pandemic, could be saved. And it is worth pointing out that currently the church commissioners cover the pay, the secretarial help, the expenses, the office, and all the ancillary costs of the Bishop of Penrith. They do not cover those for any of the archdeacons. We, as a diocese, provide the Bishop of Penrith with a house, but that's the only expense that we incur. So tonight's discussion is one part of our considerations of this whole business of Bishop's leadership team and what it should consist of and which roles we need. And following a fairly lengthy period of discernment, this isn't just tonight, it'll be ongoing through the summer, we will need to decide whether or not to approach the Diocese Commission to ask whether we can look for a replacement for the Bishop of Penrith, whether or not to make that request, if that's the direction in which we decide to go. So I'm going to suggest now that we have a bit of discussion in our groups as part of ongoing discussion right across the diocese and ecumenically as well, with a view, I hope, to bringing some kind of proposal ultimately back to you, to Synod, in October. And the two questions which will go up on the screen, which we're going to be asking, are these. First of all, within the Bishop Staff Team, BLT, what is the most useful role of a suffragan bishop? And secondly, what do you think should be priority areas of work for a suffragan bishop if we continue to have one in this diocese? So Dave will put you into groups now, and when we come back from those groups, I will explain what's going to happen next. Thank you very much, everybody, for taking part in that discussion. We obviously haven't got time now to go around all the groups getting feedback, but I hope you may have seen a message asking people to email to Cameron Butland your anything that came up in your group or anything that you particularly want to point that you want to put across. We'd be very grateful, and Cameron is putting together everybody's views. And I would just reiterate the fact that in October, at Synod in October, for those who will still be with us, there will be a further opportunity to discuss all this. This will not be a fait accompli by then at all. And although we won't be sort of taking a vote as such, the consultation process will be continuing. And hopefully by then we'll have answered some of the questions that we are looking to answer, and we'll be a bit clearer about where people as a whole in the diocese are coming from. Which raises the question of a Deanery Synod motion that Derwent Deanery had produced. And I'm looking at Charles here, who's actually sitting only a few hundred yards away from me. And I'm going to ask whether he wants to put a motion from Derwent Deanery at this point or not.
Just very briefly, Bishop James, if I could, I almost was about to withdraw it until, with all respect, you said 2 comments, and that's why I would actually like to put it. Would you like me to go ahead and explain why I would like to put it?
Yes, that would be very helpful.
Thank you. I welcome very much what you said. What set my alarm bell slightly ringing was twofold. One is when you said the Bishop of or words to the effect of, the Bishop of Penrith needs to be looked at in the context of the Bishop's leadership team, all 10 people, all of which are needed to deliver goals under God for all. The problem with that comment is that when one is looking at staffing, every job is essential. And one of the things in our group was that everybody said a Bishop of Penrith is needed. However, the staffing team of 10, I suspect, was the same size when we had 120 stipendiary clergy. We're now down to 72 and potentially looking at going even lower in 2022, 23 and beyond. So therefore, the staffing team, your bishop's leadership team, may well need to be reduced in size, or if it is to maintain the same size, the question of its size overall needs to be addressed. And if you're just asking people within the diocese about what needs to happen at episcopal level and leadership level, we'll all say roughly what we've got. There needs to be somebody from outside the diocese, outside the process, who can ask the questions that need to be asked, the awkward questions, because turkeys don't vote for Christmas, with all respect. Not that I'm saying that anybody on your leadership team is a turkey, but on the other hand, none of us are going to vote for doing away with or argue for doing away with any of our colleagues. But all of us need to have hard questions asked about us.
Charles, can I just clarify what I meant by that? Because I think you've misunderstood my meaning. What I meant by that comment was that what is done by all those people is necessary. Now, if that needs to be done by fewer people, that was actually one of the suggestions that the task group made. So I wasn't assuming that 10 people would continue. I was talking about the roles, not the people.
I would also actually say that we need to challenge that assumption as well, because everybody says that their job is essential and that all that their job it consists of is essential. It wasn't that long ago, with all respect, Bishop, that you cut jobs, or that the diocese cut jobs that people thought were essential to do with social responsibility and passed that on to count churches together in Cumbria. And so actually essential jobs can be cut and can be done differently. That's why there needs to be some sort of external facilitation and evaluation in the process. And that's something that you haven't outlined in your presentation, which the Derwent Deanery Synod motion would add to the context, because it would expect some external facilitation and external hard questioning of the process and what you're proposing.
We're quite happy to do that. I think, I'm not quite sure you heard what I was saying. I wasn't saying that all 10 posts would continue.
Oh, I take that point, but my comment was about roles, and what the Deanery Synod motion is adding is that there needs to be external rigour to the process that you're engaged in.
Well, we could incorporate that, yeah. Carry on.
So that's the one major point. The other major point is that how the bishop leadership's team works needs to be looked at in the context of how the diocese as a whole works. Because what has been wonderful tonight is to hear you speak about, and other people, include even Richard Passmore and Fresh Expressions, talk about the diocese. And we need to find ways as a diocese of cohering together. And that includes how the diocese works together, communicates together, and asking questions about whether all the diocesan and archdeaconry and deanery committee structures are necessary, appropriate, or indeed are too burdensome and themselves should be cut. So actually reviewing Bishop's leadership team is a complex piece of work, but actually needs to be in the context of how the whole diocese works, and with some very hard questions being asked of us all. And those are the two elements that weren't there in your presentation, which is why I would like to still move the motion standing in the name of the Derwent Deanery to ensure broad breadth to the process you're outlining and external rigour and validation.
And I'm grateful for that as well. I should just point out that actually that process is one that's been going on over the last several months and accounts for there's been a massive process of reorganisation, particularly at Church House, which has been quite a painful one, actually, and has involved quite a lot of consultation. So I'm not sure that we'd be wanting to go through that entire process again, but if somebody wants us to spend the time replicating what has already happened, then so be it. So you'd like to put forward the motion?
Yes, please.
Fine. Let's have it on the screen. And perhaps you would like to read it out for us and then move it.
This synod has concerns and reservations about an appointment being made to the suffragan see of Penrith. That a decision on future appointment to this see be made in the context of a review of all senior staffing posts and roles within the diocese, together with a review of the organisational structure of the diocese, so that staffing and structures are fit for purpose, that is, for a smaller diocese with less money, but wishing to have clear lines of responsibility and empowerment to support the ministry and mission of mission communities and parishes that make up the diocese, and that such reviews be carried out by Bishop's Council with external advisors / facilitators in such a way as to ensure a wide range of participation and ownership, both of process and results, that can be forwarded to the Diocesan Synod for consideration.
Thank you. Now, you've already spoken. Is there anything else you wish to say about that from the Deanery's point of view, given that it's a Deanery Synod? motion?
We had a very rigorous discussion on this motion on its original. This is a highly amended version, and it was very fruitful, this discussion, and engaging for everybody.
Yeah, fine. We haven't got a lot of time now, but we have got time for 2 or 3 people in view of the conversations we've just been having and everything you've just heard. If anybody would like to respond to this in any direction.
Bishop James, Stuart
yes?
has raised his hand.
Who has, sorry?
Stuart Fife.
Stuart, carry on.
Bishop James, thank you. I am going to speak against the motion, although I have a degree of sympathy with it. And as always, Charles does make some insightful points. I mean, I agree, and I think we all agree that a strategic approach to senior staffing roles is really important. But I think we're slightly conflating that with, it's not quite the same question, I think, as the appointment of the Bishop of Penrith. And I think essentially I've got 2 objections to the motion, having thought long and hard about this. Firstly, the language of concerns and reservations with which the motion begins is really sends a very counterproductive message to the Diocese Commission and the Church Commissioners. Given that they'd be funding this post, it's a time of national cutbacks. I think it could be a really big own goal for the Deanery Synod to send that message at this stage. And I think, not asking for permission to appoint a new bishop could actually limit our strategic possibilities at a later stage. So I think particularly, for example, of the Bishop of Ludlow in Hereford Diocese, which until recently was a combined suffragan bishop and archdeacon's appointment, which in a smaller diocese than ours was thought to have worked very well for a very long time. It's come to an end only recently, but was generally thought to have worked very well. And that could be a really good option for us later on, as if we become even smaller. And if we lost that option now, I think we could come to regret not having that strategic option further down the line. And the second point is, I think we do clearly need a suffragan bishop. We desperately need a strategic leadership that's focused on the diocese to supplement and give wings to the oversight that you so brilliantly give us, Bishop James. We have this fantastic vision of mission communities. We've had a fantastic vision refresh, but there's a lot of work, detailed work, to be done in making mission communities a reality right across the ground. And I think we need somebody who's, first of all, got that apostolic calling, that episcopal authority, and with that authority right across the diocese, and in particular, the pastoral role of a bishop. And I think, I hear all the time that as we're emerging from COVID, morale is quite low, money's a problem. And actually, I think we need that pastoral role of the suffragan bishop really engaged at local level to help not only boost our morale, but also help us to work through some of the specific strategic issues that we've got in trying to make mission communities a reality. So that rather than being dictated to by our finances, we have a sort of vision-led approach that renews the church, reinvigorates us all with this God-filled vision that you've given us, and with hope and energy, and some quite a number of specific strategic things that a bishop needs to give careful oversight and pastoral care to. So I hope we will vote against this motion, though I have some sympathy with it, and that we will back the process that you've already outlined, Bishop.
Thank you very much indeed. Is there anybody else who would like?
Yeah, Bishop James, Robin Hams raised his hand.
Yeah, Robin.
Yeah, thank you, Bishop. I just wanted to actually echo some of what has just been said. And yeah, I was concerned about the language of concern. I don't think that's what I want to communicate about this discussion. I want to say I think it is, really important that we take seriously the need for a Bishop of Penrith. I think that is going to be critical for vision, for making sure this refreshed vision is embedded over the next few years, particularly if we do face another episcopal vacancy, perhaps in the next few years. And I think actually I'm confident that some of what the the motion talks about in terms of the process, in terms of drawing on external wisdom, I think that will happen anyway, from the sounds of what we've already heard. And so, yeah, I don't think I want to back this motion, or it expresses where I'm at.
Thank you, Robin. One more I think we could have time for. Anybody else would like to say something?
Martin Holgate's raised his hand.
Martin.
Thank you. Colleagues, I have sympathy with this motion, but like Stuart and Robin, I wonder very much whether it isn't premature at this stage. As I understood what you said, Bishop James, the intention is that there should be wide consultation in the next few months about whether and in what way and with what mandate a new Bishop of Penrith might be appointed, and that this would come back to this synod in the October session.
Yeah.
I would hope that we can trust the Bishop's Council and advisors between now and then to consider the issues that have come forward from Derwent Deanery, who will obviously have every right to make their proposals into that consultative process, as other deaneries will. So I would hope that perhaps the sponsors of this very, in many ways, important and carefully considered motion might consider withdrawing it, because I believe that the aims they're seeking to achieve can in fact be dealt with in a consultative process, which is going to go forward anyway. Thank you.
Martin, thank you very much indeed. And I think sorry, Charles, was that you wanting to speak?
Yes, if I could just respond to that. I think, just to respond to the three previous speakers, to say that I take on board the points that they've made, and the points that you've heard, Bishop, and have been expressed here. I think if this motion goes to a vote, it potentially could be seen as tying this synod one way or to the other to particular courses of action, either to appoint a bishop or not to appoint a bishop, or to either not supporting a bishop or to supporting a bishop, because of course it's not a synodical appointment, but is a your appointment. So therefore I would like to propose withdrawing the motion, but noting on the ground, but so long as the comments have been raised by the Deanery and by the three other speakers are taken on board by Bishop's Council and the senior leadership team as we go forward.
Thank you very much indeed. And I think I can give an absolute assurance that all the comments that have been made, and particularly the comments that are made in the motion, will be taken very seriously, and we'll look at the best way doing precisely what you suggested. So thank you very much. So that motion is withdrawn. There are no private members' motions, and we haven't received any questions. So slightly over time, for which I apologise, everybody. We will draw the synod to its close with very best wishes to those who will not be standing again for it, but in the hope that most will, and we'll have new people as well for the various vacancies that exist. And with huge thanks to everybody for your participation this evening, which has been extremely valuable and helpful. And perhaps we can end with a blessing. Father, watch over us this night, we pray. Give us peace in our hearts and in our homes. Give peace in our troubled world, and enable us to share the good news of the gospel with which we've been entrusted, to be lights, your lights in a dark world, and to love one another and all those around us in your name and in your power. And may the blessing of God Almighty, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit be upon us all and remain with us now and always. Amen.